The alien's supreme commander was still laughing when the human deadline expired. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more HFY stories. Supreme Commander Varoth of the Caladrian Imperium leaned back in his command throne, his scales rippling with amusement as he replayed the human transmission for the third time. Around him, the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Sovereign's fist hummed with the quiet efficiency of a warship at the peak of its power. Holographic displays painted the air in shades of amber and crimson, each one showing another element of the Caurian armada that dominated the Threshold system. 317 warships, the largest battle group the Imperium had assembled in a generation. Asterisk, while all of them arrayed in perfect formation around the disputed mining colonies that humanity claimed belonged to them. Play it again, Barakov commanded, his voice a deep rumble that carried the weight of 40 years of military service. The communication officer complied, and once more the human face appeared in the holographic display. It was a young human, unremarkable in appearance, with the bland features and dull coloring that characterized their species. The human wore what appeared to be a diplomatic uniform, though Varoth had learned to recognize the subtle tells of military bearing beneath civilian trappings. "This is Ambassador Chen of the Terran Coalition," the human said, her voice level and professional. "You are occupying the Threshold system in violation of established colonial treaties, and we are formally demanding your immediate withdrawal. You have 72 hours to comply. If you do not withdraw, we will be forced to dispatch one fleet to secure the system. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. Varoth's laughter echoed across the bridge, joined by the amused clicking and hissing of his senior staff. One fleet. The humans threatened to send one fleet against the might of the Caurian Imperium's Third Armada. "Intelligence assessment," Varoth ordered, gesturing to his tactical analyst. Subcommander Renthis stepped forward, his younger scales gleaming under the bridge lighting. He activated his personal display, pulling up a cascade of data that materialized in the air between them. "Supreme Commander, our intelligence on human military capacity is limited," Renthis admitted. "They have been unusually secretive since first contact 12 years ago. However, our long-range observation posts have tracked their ship movements in 17 adjacent sectors. Best estimates place their total naval strength at approximately 200 vessels scattered across their territorial space." 200 vessels for an entire species navy, Varoth mused. "And they threaten us with one fleet. How many ships constitute a human fleet?" Renthis, based on observed formation patterns, "Sir, we estimate between 15 and 30 vessels per fleet group. Standard composition appears to be a mix of cruiser and destroyer-class ships with occasional frigate support." Varoth's amusement deepened. 30 ships at most against 317 Caurian warships, each one a masterwork of Imperial engineering, bristling with weapons that had conquered a dozen species over the past century. "They must think we're fools," muttered Battle Coordinator Shells from her station. "Or desperate enough to try bluffing." "Perhaps," Varoth replied. He stood his full height, impressive even among the tall Caladrian species, and walked to the primary viewport. Beyond the reinforced crystal, the Threshold system spread before him in all its contested glory. The gas giant Threshold Prime dominated the view, its rings glittering with the mineral wealth that had sparked this dispute. 3 colonial habitats orbited the planet, each one currently under Caurian occupation. The human settlers had been relocated peacefully, of course, though their protests had been noted and ignored. "The humans have no presence in this sector," Varoth continued, had his tone becoming more serious. "The nearest confirmed human military installation is 6 jump points away. By the time they could muster a response force, we'll have fortified our position beyond any hope of dislodgement. And even if they did send this supposed fleet," he turned back to his bridge crew, "what could 30 ships possibly do against the Third Armada?" "With respect," Supreme Commander Renthis interjected, his voice carrying a note of caution that Varoth had learned to pay attention to during their years of service together. "We know very little about human weapons technology. They've never engaged in open warfare since making contact with the galactic community. Their defensive capabilities are unknown. Unknown because they're negligible," Shell countered. "Now they're a single-planet species that achieved faster than light travel barely a century ago. They have no allies, no trading partners of significance, and no military reputation. If they possessed weapons worth fearing, they would have demonstrated them by now. That's basic strategic doctrine." Farth nodded slowly. Shell was right. Of course, in the carefully balanced dance of galactic politics, power had to be demonstrated to be respected. The Caladrian Imperium maintained its position through shows of force, through the visible might of its armadas. The Korvath unity commanded respect through their technological marvels displayed at every opportunity. Even the peaceful Mandalian collective maintained their neutrality through the known power of their defensive networks. But humanity, Humanity had remained silent, withdrawn. They accepted the mining rights they were granted, the territorial boundaries imposed upon them, the limitations placed on their expansion. They participated in galactic councils with quiet voices and submitted disputes through proper diplomatic channels. Until now. Asterisk. The 72-hour deadline expires and Ferrith checked his chronometer. 14 minutes. Renthis, what is the status of our long-range sensors fully operational? Supreme Commander, we have coverage of all approach vectors within 3 light years. Standard early warning protocols are in effect. If a human fleet enters the system, we'll detect them the moment they drop from FTL. Good. Vareth returned to his command throne, settling into its embrace with the confidence of a predator in its den. When the deadline passes and no human fleet appears, I want a full recording of our sensor logs transmitted to the diplomatic corps. The humans need to understand that empty threats carry consequences in the real galaxy. And if they do send ships, Renthis asked quietly. Vareth's expression hardened. Then we teach them a lesson about challenging the Imperium. Battle Coordinator Shellick, prepare engagement protocols. If human vessels appear, we surround them. We disable them and we capture them for study. I want to know what gave them the audacity to threaten us. As you command, Supreme Commander, the bridge fell into a focused silence as the final minutes ticked away. Vareth watched his displays, each one showing a different aspect of his armada's dominance. 317 warships, their positions perfect, their weapons primed, their crews ready. The pride of the Calorian Imperium assembled here to claim what was rightfully theirs by the oldest law in the galaxy, the right of the strong. Humanity would learn, they all did eventually. The chronometer reached 0. Nothing happened. Vareth allowed himself a satisfied rumble. As expected, the humans were. Sir, the sensor officer's voice cut through the bridge's quiet confidence like a blade. Contact. Single massive energy signature just appeared at the system edge. Distance 42 million kilometers, bearing 273 Mark 15. Vareth's satisfaction evaporated, replaced by sharp focus. Classification. The sensor officer's claws danced across his console, his scales paling slightly as he processed the incoming data. Supreme Commander, the readings aren't making sense. The energy signature is enormous. It's reading as a single object, but the mass displacement is... He trailed off, his voice carrying an edge of confusion that sent a ripple of unease through the bridge crew. But what? Vareth demanded. The sensor officer looked up, his eyes wide. Supreme Commander, if these readings are accurate, that single object is generating more energy than our entire armada combined. The bridge fell silent. Vareth felt the first cold touch of something he hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. Confirm those readings now. Confirming, sir. Running full diagnostic. Sensors are operating within normal parameters. The signal is, the officer's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The signal is real, sir. On the primary display, a new marker appeared, pulsing at the edge of the threshold system. One single point of light alone in the darkness, impossibly bright against the sensor grid. One fleet, the humans had said. Vareth stared at the display. His amusement gone, his confidence suddenly feeling less absolute than it had just moments before. All ships to battle stations. He ordered, his voice steady despite the questions now flooding his mind. Prepare to intercept. I want to know what we're dealing with. The humans had kept their word. They had sent one fleet. But as the massive energy signature began moving toward them with impossible speed, Supreme Commander Vareth found himself wondering for the first time if the humans had been threatening them at all or warning them. The transit from the system's edge should have taken hours. The human signature crossed the distance in 17 minutes. Oh, impossible, Renthis breathed, his claws frozen over his tactical display. Supreme Commander, that velocity exceeds anything in our database. They're moving at 72 light speed in real space. No known species has achieved sustained sublight speeds above 4. Vareth's jaw clenched as he watched the contact marker slice through his carefully arranged defensive perimeter like it didn't exist. 317 warships positioned in overlapping fields of fire. Multiple fallback positions prepared, and the human signature simply ignored them all. It was heading directly for the center of the system, directly for Threshold Prime, on a trajectory that would bring it within visual range in less than 10 minutes. Weapons range, Vareth demanded. They'll enter extreme missile range in 4 minutes, Shell reported, her voice tight. Energy weapon range in 7. But Supreme Commander, she hesitated, something she rarely did. The mass readings are still climbing. Our sensors are having difficulty resolving the contact into a coherent image. Show me what we have. The main view screen flickered, and a grainy long-range visual feed will replace the tactical display. At first, Varoth thought the image was corrupted. There was too much ship. The resolution kept trying to adjust to find the edges of the vessel, but they seemed to extend beyond the frame of reference. Computer established scale reference to Renthus ordered. A Caladrian dreadnought silhouette appeared on the screen for comparison. 2 kilometers of Imperial engineering, the largest class of warship in the Armada Chudwaza. The computer placed it next to the approaching human contact. The human vessel dwarfed it, not by a factor of 2 or 3. The Calrian dreadnought looked like a service shuttle parked beside a planetary habitat. The human ship was a geometric impossibility, a wedge-shaped mountain of metal and energy that seemed to bend the light around it as it moved. Computer verify scale, Vareth said, his voice carefully controlled. Scale verified, the synthetic voice replied. Contact length 43.6 kilometers. Width at widest point 19.2 kilometers, height 8.7 kilometers. Mass displacement equivalent to Class 7 orbital station. Someone on the bridge made a choking sound. That's not a ship, Shellick whispered. That's a mobile fortress. Vareth forced himself to think past the shock. So the humans had built one enormous vessel. Impressive, certainly. Intimidating, absolutely. But size alone didn't win battles. The lumbering giant would be slow to maneuver, vulnerable to coordinated strikes. One ship, no matter how large, couldn't possibly defend against 300 attackers simultaneously. Battle Coordinator deploy intercept group. Theta 50 vessels. Standard intimidation formation, close to within 10,000 kilometers, and demand their surrender. I want them to understand what they're facing. Yes, Supreme Commander Shell's claws moved with practiced efficiency across her console. Across the Armada, 50 Calrian warships broke formation and accelerated toward the approaching human vessel. Vareth watched the tactical display as his ships moved into position. 50 ships, at each one a predator in its own right, moving with the synchronized precision that had become the hallmark of Calrian military doctrine. They formed a 3-dimensional web around the human vessel's projected path, positioning themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that could reduce any normal ship to slag within seconds. Intercept Group Theta reports. Weapons lock achieved, Shellick announced. Group leader requesting permission to open communications. Granted, put it on main display. The view screen split. On one side, the massive human vessel continued its inexorable approach, now close enough that individual surface features were becoming visible. Angular armor plating, what might be sensor arrays the size of buildings and structures whose purpose Vareth couldn't immediately identify. But on the other side appeared Group Leader Corrin, a veteran commander whose scales bore the scars of 24 engagements. Unidentified human vessel. This is Group Leader Choran of the Caladrian Imperial Navy. Corrin's voice boomed with authority. You are in violation of Calrian territorial space. You will immediately cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 30 seconds to comply. For a long moment, there was no response. The human vessel continued its approach, its velocity unchanged. 20 seconds, 25, 30. No response from the human vessel. Corran reported they're still approaching distance now, 8,000 kilometers and closing. Recommend the communication cutoff as every display on Varoth's bridge suddenly flickered. And not a power disruption, something else. A moment of interference like static passing through sophisticated systems that should have been immune to such things. When the display stabilized, a new feed had appeared on the main view screen, superseding Corrin's connection. It showed the bridge of the human vessel. Var had expected something primitive, perhaps chaotic. What he saw instead was a cathedral of controlled purpose. The human bridge was vast, with multiple levels visible in the depth of the image. Dozens of humans worked at stations that glowed with soft blue light, their movements calm and precise. The architecture was clean, almost austere, with none of the ornamental excess that marked Calrian ship design. Everything looked functional, purposeful, and unnervingly advanced. At the center of it all, in a raised command chair that bore a striking resemblance to Varoth's own throne, sat a human woman. She was older than the ambassador who had delivered the ultimatum, with gray streaking through her dark hair. She wore a dark uniform without excessive decoration, though Varoth's practiced eye caught the subtle insignias that spoke of rank and authority. Her face was composed, her dark eyes sharp and evaluating, as she looked directly into the camera. Directly at him. Supreme Commander Varoth. The human said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made the bridge of his flagship feel suddenly smaller. I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Coalition Navy. You were given 72 hours to withdraw from the threshold system. You did not withdraw. Admiral Chen Varath replied, keeping his voice level despite the questions racing through his mind. How had they bypassed his communication security? How did they know his name? You are significantly outnumbered. One ship, however large, cannot stand against the might of the Third Armada. I strongly suggest you reverse course before this situation escalates beyond diplomatic resolution. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Supreme Commander, you currently have 50 vessels surrounding my ship in what you believe is an intimidation formation. I need you to understand something very clearly. We did not come here to negotiate. We came here to enforce the withdrawal we requested. I'm giving you one final opportunity to comply. Order your forces to leave the threshold system immediately. The audacity of it struck Varath like a physical blow. You're giving me an ultimatum, Admiral. I have 317 warships at my command. You have one ship and apparently no understanding of military mathematics. I have one ship, Admiral Chen agreed, her tone unchanged. That is correct, Supreme Commander. I know your tactical doctrine. You surround, you intimidate, and then you overwhelm. You've fought 17 major engagements using variations of this same strategy. It's worked well for you against the Pelthian Swarm, the Korvathi clans, and the Dranathi Collective. It will not work here. Varath felt a chill race down his spine. The Pelthian campaign had been classified. The engagement reports the tactical analyses, all of it buried in encrypted Imperial archives. How do you have 50 ships within weapons range of my vessel right now? Admiral Chen continued, as if he hadn't spoken. I'm going to activate our defensive screens. I need you to watch what happens to your sensor readings when I do. Weapons officer brings screens to standard operational power. On the split screen, Varath saw a human officer, male younger, equally calm, touch his console. Screens active, Admiral irradiating at 20% capacity. Every alarm on Varov's bridge shrieked to life simultaneously. Supreme Commander, the sensor officer's was cracked with panic. Energy spike, the human vessel, just the power output just increased by a factor of... He stopped, his claws trembling over his console. Sir, the readings can't be right. No ship can generate that much power. It's reading higher than a stellar reactor. It's impossible. Confirm, Varath roared. Confirm, sir. Multiple redundant systems confirming. The human ship is radiating energy at levels that should require a contained singularity. Their defensive screens alone are drawing more power than our entire fleet's reactor output combined. On the view screen, Admiral Chen watched him with those dark, patient eyes. Supreme Commander, what you're seeing is my ship operating at minimal defensive power. We are currently running on auxiliary systems only. I can increase output if you need further demonstration, but I'd prefer not to. Your sensor equipment appears to be struggling with the current readings. Far's mind raced. A bluff. It had to be a bluff. They were broadcasting false sensor data, overwhelming his systems with spoofed signals. And no ship could actually generate that kind of power. The physics didn't allow it. Group leader Korthan Barath said, keeping his voice steady. Fire a warning shot across the human vessel's bow. Minimal power. I want to see how their defenses actually perform. There was a pause. Sir, are you certain our tactical analysis suggests do it? From his position 8,000 kilometers away, Caron complied. A single particle beam lanced out from one of the intercepting cruisers. A precisely calculated shot designed to pass within 100 meters of the human vessel's hull, close enough to demonstrate capability, far enough to avoid actual engagement. The beam struck the human defensive screen and simply stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed in a shower of energy dissipation. It just stopped, frozen in space for a fraction of a second before dissipating harmlessly. Sweet ancestors, Renthus breathed. Weapons analysis, Varath demanded. Sir, that beam should have delivered enough energy to vaporize a 100-meter section of standard armor plating. The human screens didn't fluctuate, didn't drain, didn't register the impact at all. It was like firing at a planetary defense grid. On the view screen, Admiral Chen's expression finally changed not to anger, but to something that might have been disappointment. That was unwise, Supreme Commander, she said quietly. You just fired on a Terran Coalition naval vessel. Under our rules of engagement, that constitutes an act of war. However, I'm going to make an assumption that you didn't understand what you were dealing with. I am willing to attribute this to ignorance rather than malice, but only once. She leaned forward slightly in her command chair. Let me be very clear about your situation. The vessel you are facing is the TCS Indomitable, a Titan-class fleet carrier. She is 43.66 kilometers long, mounts 472 primary weapon systems, and carries a crew of 18,000. Her reactor core operates on principles your scientists haven't discovered yet. Her armor is composed of materials your weapons cannot penetrate. Her defensive screens can withstand a sustained bombardment from every ship in your fleet simultaneously for approximately. She glanced at one of her officers who consulted a display. 4 hours and 17 minutes, Admiral, the officer reported. Assuming they maintain continuous fire and we don't maneuver or return fire. 4 hours, Admiral Chen repeated, her eyes locked on Varos, before we would need to divert power from non-essential systems to maintain our screens. Shrimi Commander, you are not facing a ship. You are facing a mobile weapons platform that was designed specifically to enforce territorial sovereignty against numerically superior forces. We are very, very good at what we do. Varoth's claws dug into the arms of his command throne. Every instinct screamed at him to reject what he was hearing. It was impossible. It violated every principle of naval warfare, every lesson learned across centuries of Calrian military history. But the sensor readings didn't lie, and the calm certainty in Admiral Chen's voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "So what do you want?" Fark asked, his voice rough. "I want you to leave the threshold system. I want you to return the colonists you displaced, and I want you to transmit a formal apology to the Terran Coalition for violating our territorial sovereignty. You have 1 hour to begin compliance. If you do not, I will be forced to take action to ensure compliance. And if I refuse, if I order my fleet to engage," Admiral Chen's expression softened just slightly, not with cruelty, but with something that might have been pity. "Then, Supreme Commander, you will discover exactly why humanity doesn't demonstrate our military capabilities casually. We prefer peace. We genuinely do. But we did not build ships like the Indomitable because we expected to use them as deterrents. We built them because we knew eventually someone would make the mistake you're making right now." She gestured to someone off-screen. "Send the Supreme Commander the full tactical specifications for a Titan-class carrier. Let him understand what he's facing. Maybe it will help him make the right choice." A data packet appeared in Varos' command queue. Renthus opened it automatically, and his scales went pale as ghost light. "Supreme Commander," Renthus whispered, his voice shaking. "If even half of these specifications are accurate, we can't win this fight. We can't even survive it." Varoth stared at the human admiral on his screen, at the massive ship that hung in space like a monument to humanity's hidden power, at the sensor readings that screamed impossibility with every passing second. One fleet, the humans had said, they had meant it literally. "You have 1 hour. "Oh, Supreme Commander," Admiral Chen said. "I suggest you use it wisely. Chen out." The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, Varoth heard the panicked breathing of his bridge crew, the frantic whisper of computer systems trying to process data they weren't equipped to handle, and the thundering of his own hearts as they struggled with a realization that was crystallizing into terrible certainty. Humanity had not been bluffing. They had been warning him, and he had not listened. 47 minutes later, Supreme Commander Varoth made his decision. Battle Coordinator Shelik, transmit orders to all fleet elements. Full assault formation. Every ship, every weapon, simultaneous strike. We hit them with everything we have. Renthus spun from his console, his scales flaring with alarm. "Supreme Commander, the tactical data they provided shows whatever they want us to believe." Varoth's voice cracked across the bridge like a whip. "Don't you see it's psychological warfare? They show us one enormous ship. They flood our sensors with false readings. They make us afraid. But I've spent 40 years learning one fundamental truth about warfare. Subcommander, there is no defense that cannot be overwhelmed, no shield that cannot be broken, no ship that cannot be destroyed." He stood from his command throne, his full authority radiating through every word. "The Third Armada has never retreated, never surrendered. We will not start today because one species built one oversized vessel and tried to frighten us with technical specifications. We are the Calrian Imperium. We are the iron fist of the galaxy, and we will show these humans what happens when prey tries to bare its teeth at predators." Shelley hesitated for only a moment, then her professional discipline reasserted itself. "Yes, Supreme Commander, transmitting assault orders now. All ships acknowledge they're moving into attack formation." On the tactical display, 317 Calrian warships began to converge on the Indomitable. They moved with practiced precision, years of training and doctrine guiding them into a three-dimensional sphere of overwhelming firepower. Every angle of approach covered every weapon system, primed every commander ready to unleash the full fury of the Imperial Navy. Var watched the formation take shape and felt a savage satisfaction cut through his fear. Yes, this was what this Calrian Imperium did best. Not diplomacy or not negotiation. Overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. "Distance to optimal firing range 30 seconds, Shell reported. All ships report weapons hot. Targeting solutions locked. Open channel to Admiral Chin, Feroth ordered. The human's face reappeared on his screen. She looked tired now, Feroth noticed. Not afraid, but feel like someone watching an inevitable tragedy unfold. Supreme Commander, she said quietly, please don't do this. You gave me an ultimatum, Admiral. I'm giving you one in return. Surrender your vessel immediately or we will take it by force. You have 30 seconds. Admiral Chen closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something had changed in her expression. The sadness was still there, but it had been joined by a cold. Was professional resolve that made Feroth's scales prickle with instinctive unease. I tried, she said more to herself than to him. No one can say I didn't try. She straightened in her command chair. Weapons officer, you are authorized to engage. All defensive and offensive systems full operational power. Authorization code Chen Alpha 7 actual. The human weapons officer's hands moved across his console. Authorization confirmed, Admiral, bringing all systems online. May God have mercy on them, he won't. Admiral Chen replied, but maybe we can. She looked directly at Feroth one last time. Supreme Commander, what you're about to see is not personal. It's not revenge. It's simply what happens when you force a Titan-ass carrier to defend itself. I want you to remember that you were warned, or remember that you were given every opportunity to choose peace. The communication cut. All ships fire, Feroth roared. 317 Calrian warships opened fire simultaneously. The visual feed from external cameras showed the moment in terrible clarity. Particle beams, plasma lances, missile swarms, kinetic projectiles, every weapon in the Calrian arsenal unleashed at once. The space around the Indomitable lit up like a newborn star, a maelstrom of destructive energy that should have been capable of cracking a small moon. The barrage struck the human vessel's defensive screens and stopped, not deflected, not absorbed with visible energy dissipation. The weapons simply ceased to exist the moment they touched the shimmering field of force that surrounded the Indomitable. Particle beams vanished as if they'd been switched off. Missiles detonated harmlessly against a barrier they couldn't penetrate. Kinetic projectiles stopped dead in space and then drifted away. Their momentum stolen by forces Feroth didn't understand. Impact assessment, Feroth demanded, even though his eyes were telling him what his mind refused to accept. No damage, the sensor officer reported, his voice hollow. Zero penetration. The human shields aren't even fluctuating. It's like we're not even shooting at them. Impossible. Increased firing rate, all ships maximum output. The assault intensified. 317 warships pouring everything they had into a single target. The energy expenditure was so massive that Feroth could see the power readings on his own dreadnought beginning to drop as the reactor struggled to maintain the sustained barrage. The Indomitable hung in space serene and untouched, wrapped in a defensive field that made a mockery of the Calrian Imperium's mightiest weapons, and then it fired back. Supreme Commander, the human vessel is activating weapon systems. Shell's voice carried an edge of panic. Energy spikes across the hull. Multiple signatures. I'm counting. Ancestors preserve us. I'm counting hundreds of active weapon ports. The Indomitable's hull seemed to come alive. What Feroth had thought were armor plates or sensor arrays began to shift and reconfigure. Ports opened along the vessel's 43-kilometer length and revealing weapon systems that glowed with a pale blue light that made his sensors scream warnings. The first weapons to fire were the point defense systems. They weren't like anything Feroth had seen before. No visible beams, no projectiles, just impossibility. Ships simply ceased to function. One moment, a Caladrian destroyer was maneuvering for a better firing angle. The next, its entire electronic system went dark. Its weapons offline, its engines dead. Another cruiser tried to break formation and retreat. Its power core shut down mid-flight, leaving it drifting helplessly. What are they doing? Feroth whispered. Auromagnetic pulse weapons, Renthus said, his voice shaking as he read the sensor data. But not like anything in our database. They're not destroying the ships. They're reaching inside them, targeting specific systems, shutting down individual components without damaging the hull. 30 ships disabled in 15 seconds. 60 ships in 30 seconds. 100 ships drifting dead in space. Their crews trapped inside vessels that had become elaborate coffins. And the Indomitable hadn't even used its primary weapons yet. All ships scatter, Feroth ordered. Break formation, evasive maneuvers. Too late. The main batteries fired. They were mounted along the Indomitable central axis. Massive weapon systems that Feroth had mistaken for structural elements. When they fired, they didn't produce beams or projectiles. They produced something worse. Absolute destruction delivered at the speed of light. A lance of coherent energy. not plasma, not particles. Something else entirely. Reached out and touched a Calrian-heavy cruiser. For a fraction of a second, the cruiser's shields flared, its armor superheated, its crew had time to scream. Then the ship simply ceased to exist. Not exploded, not broken apart. One moment it was there. 2 kilometers of military engineering and 500 crew members. The next moment, there was nothing but expanding vapor and radiation signatures. The main battery fired again and again and again. Each shot erased a Karian warship from existence. Each blast traveled faster than point defense, could track faster than ships could evade. The Indomitable's targeting was perfect. Its fire discipline, absolute. It wasn't spraying weapons wildly. It was executing a precise surgical strike against an enemy that had dared to threaten it. Casualties, Var heard himself shouting. Battle coordinator casualty report. Shell's voice was barely audible over the chaos of alarms and panicked communications flooding the bridge. 147 ships destroyed, 93 ships disabled remaining vessels attempting to break contact. Supreme Commander, we have to retreat. We can't fight this. We can't even survive this. Vareth stared at the tactical display in numb horror. In less than 3 minutes, the Third Armada, the pride of the Calrian Imperium, had been reduced to scattered wreckage and fleeing survivors. 317 ships, the largest battle group in a generation, and they hadn't scratched the human vessel, hadn't even made its shields flicker. The Indomitable is ceasing fire, Renthis reported, his voice shaking. Admiral Chen is hailing us on screen, Vareth whispered. Admiral Chen's face appeared, and Vareth saw no triumph there. No satisfaction at the destruction she'd unleashed, just that same deep sadness, mixed now with visible exhaustion. Supreme Commander Vareth, she said quietly, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen very carefully. I have just disabled or destroyed 75% of your fleet. I did this in under 3 minutes while operating at 15% of my vessel's maximum combat capability. My weapon systems have barely warmed up. My shields have not been tested. My crew has not even gone to full battle stations. She paused, letting that sink in. I am now going to tell you something that I suspect will reshape your entire understanding of humanity's place in this galaxy. And the Indomitable is one of 70 for Titan-class carriers in the Terran Coalition Navy. That's just the Titan class. We have 6 other ship classifications in our fleet, ranging from destroyer-class vessels that could take on your dreadnoughts individually to Leviathan-class command ships that make the Indomitable look small. Vareth's blood turned to ice. We have been part of the galactic community for 12 years. Admiral Chen continued, in that time we have watched, we have learned, we have studied every species, every conflict, every war. We have built a navy specifically designed to ensure that humanity will never be threatened by any force in this galaxy. And we have kept this secret because we genuinely hoped, that we would never need to use it. She leaned forward, her dark eyes boring into his. You asked me what one fleet could do against 300 ships. Supreme Commander, I have just shown you one ship, one Titan-class carrier, with orders to use minimum necessary force. This is what humanity can do when we are patient, when we show mercy, when we give you every opportunity to choose peace. Behind her, Vareth could see her bridge crew working with that same calm efficiency. No celebration, no excitement, just professionals doing their job, even as they just destroyed 200 warships. Your remaining vessels are free to leave the threshold system, Admiral Chen said. Collect your disabled ships if you can. Rescue the crews still alive, but understand this, the threshold system is human territory. It has always been human territory. And if the Calaudrian Imperium ever violates our borders again, if you ever threaten our colonists, if you ever make the mistake of assuming we are weak because we choose peace. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I will personally bring all 74 Titan-class carriers to your home system, and I will give your government exactly the same choice I gave you today. Leave peacefully, or discover what happens when humanity stops showing restraint. The tactical display showed the remaining Karian ships in full retreat, fleeing the system as fast as their engines could push them. In the debris field where the Third Armada had once stood, proud emergency beacons flickered from disabled vessels, their crews praying for rescue from the very enemy they tried to destroy. And through it all, the Indomitable hung in space like a monument to humanity's hidden power. Untouched, undamaged, barely even tested. You have 1 hour to evacuate the system, Admiral Chen said. Don't make me reduce that time. Chen out. The screen went dark. Vareth sat in his command throne, surrounded by the ruins of his fleet and the ashes of his certainty. The bridge was silent except for the desperate, calm chatter from surviving ships and the quiet sobbing of junior officers who just watched their worldview shatter. Renthis approached slowly, his scales pale as death. Supreme Commander, what are your orders? Vareth looked at his sub-commander, his friend, and saw his own horror reflected back at him. What were his orders? Retreat. Surrender. Send a desperate message to the Imperium, warning them that everything they thought they knew about humanity was a carefully maintained lie. Signal all surviving ships, Varoth said, and his voice dead. Full retreat. Rescue operations for disabled vessels. We're leaving. And the threshold system. Farth looked at the view screen where the Indomitable continued its patient vigil. The threshold system belongs to humanity, he said quietly. It always did. We were just too arrogant to understand what that meant. As the Sovereign's fist turned away and began its limping journey out of the system, Varoth caught one final glimpse of the human vessel. Even at this distance, even in defeat, part of him still couldn't quite process what he'd seen. One ship. Humanity had sent one ship, and it had been more than enough. The age of Calrian supremacy, Varoth realized with cold certainty, had ended today. Ended not with diplomacy or gradual decline, but with 3 minutes of absolute and overwhelming surrender of a power that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The humans had warned them. The humans had given them every chance. And when forced to act, the humans had shown exactly why they'd been so quiet, so cautious, so unwilling to demonstrate their capabilities. Because once you knew what humanity was capable of, Varov thought as his shattered fleet fled into the darkness, you could never unknow it. And the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Caladrian High Command convened 8 hours after the Third Armada's retreat from the Threshold system. Supreme Commander Varoth stood before the assembled War Council in the Great Hall of the Imperial Command Complex, stripped of his ceremonial armor, his scales dulled with exhaustion and shame. Around him, a holographic projection showed the disaster in merciless detail. Wreckage fields where proud warships had been. Disabled vessels being towed away by human rescue craft. Human rescue craft, because the humans had actually sent aid to recover Calrian survivors. The footage of the engagement itself played and replayed from a dozen different sensor perspectives, each one showing the same impossible reality. High Chancellor Marath, eldest of the Council and architect of 3 decades of Calrian expansion, watched the final moments of the battle in silence. When the footage ended, when the Indomitable ceased fire and left the broken remnants of the Third Armada to flee, he spoke with a voice like grinding stone. 214 ships destroyed or disabled. 6,743 casualties of the largest military defeat in Caladrian history. His eyes fixed on Varoth in under 3 minutes by one ship. Yes, High Chancellor, Varoth said. There was nothing else to say. And you're certain the censored data is accurate. This isn't some form of technological deception. Fleet Analyst Kelther, her scales bearing the gold markings of the Intelligence Division, stepped forward. High Chancellor, we've analyzed the data from 17 different ships cross-referenced with long-range observation posts and verified against independent civilian sensor logs. The readings are consistent across all sources. Additionally, she gestured, and a new hologram appeared. The humans transmitted a complete technical specification package for their Titan-class carriers. We initially assumed it was psychological warfare. How our analysis suggests it was actually understated. Morath's scales rippled with disbelief. Understated, yes, High Chancellor. The weapons performance we observed exceeded the specifications they provided by approximately 12%. The power generation capacity was undersold by nearly 20%. It appears they gave us accurate information, but rounded down to make it seem less threatening. They were trying to help us understand without terrifying us completely. They failed at the latter, muttered War Coordinator Shelkath from his position at the council table. Calthera continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. High Chancellor, based on our analysis, warned a single Titan-class carrier operating at full combat capability could engage our entire home fleet simultaneously and maintain a 93% probability of victory. If the humans possess 74 such vessels as Admiral Chen claimed, then they possess sufficient military force too. She paused as if the words themselves were difficult to speak, to subjugate every major power in the known galaxy simultaneously. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. That's not possible, Shelkath said, but his voice carried no conviction. No species could develop such technology in 12 years. We've been studying them. We've had intelligence operatives observing their colonies, their trade routes, their decoys. Farth interrupted. His voice was hollow. High Chancellor, But with your permission, Mordrath gestured for him to continue. I've had 8 hours to review what happened and to think about what we missed. The humans have been in the galactic community for 12 years. In that time, they've shown us exactly what they wanted us to see. Small colonies, modest trade vessels, diplomatic ships that looked appropriately primitive. They participated in councils. They accepted borders we imposed. They seemed manageable. He pulled up a star chart showing human territory, the small sphere of space the Kaurian Imperium and other powers had allowed humanity to claim. But look at their actual territorial claims. They're small, compact, easily defensible. Whereas they never expanded aggressively, never competed for resources, and never built the sprawling empire that a species of their industrial capacity should have created. We thought they were weak. We thought they were cautious. We never considered that they might be hiding. He zoomed in on the threshold system. They let us take this system, didn't resist, didn't protest beyond diplomatic channels. Let us think we'd won. And then when we refused to leave after a formal demand, they sent one ship not to negotiate, not to posture. They sent it to teach us a lesson. But why Shalath demanded, if they have this kind of power, why hide? Why not simply take what they want? Declare themselves the dominant force and reshape the galaxy in their image. That's what the Imperium did. That's what any rational species would do. Varath looked at the war coordinator, and for a moment he saw the face of Admiral Chen in his memory. That sadness, that exhaustion, that visible reluctance to use the power at her disposal. Because they don't want to, Varath said quietly. High Chancellor, I spoke with Admiral Chen twice. She gave us warnings. She tried to prevent the engagement even after we fired on her vessel. An act of war by any definition. She still tried to minimize casualties. The Indomitable could have destroyed every ship in the Third Armada. Instead, it disabled over 100 vessels, gave their crews a chance to survive. The humans sent rescue craft to help us recover our own wounded. He gestured at the holographic display. This isn't the behavior of a species that wants to conquer. This is the behavior of a species that has built overwhelming military force specifically so they never have to use it. They want to be left alone. They want peace. But they've ensured that anyone who threatens that peace will face consequences so severe that no one would dare try twice. A deterrent strategy. Mordrath mused. Build weapons so terrible that no one will fight you. Not just terrible, High Chancellor. Incomprehensible, absolute, the kind of military superiority that makes aggression suicide. Varath pulled up another file. After the engagement, Admiral Chen sent me a personal communication, not a threat, an explanation. She said that humanity studied every major conflict in galactic history for 12 years. They analyzed every war, every strategy, every tactical doctrine, and then they built a navy specifically designed to make conventional warfare obsolete. He played the message. Admiral Chen's face appeared. Oh, still wearing that expression of professional exhaustion. Supreme Commander Varoth, by now your government will have received our technical specifications and battle analysis. I want you to understand why we built what we built. Humanity learned a hard lesson in our own history. Peace through strength only works if the strength is undeniable. Half measures invite testing. Gradual displays of force invite escalation. But absolute overwhelming superiority demonstrated once properly ends conflicts before they begin. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to impose our government on other species. We don't even want to be involved in galactic politics more than necessary. But we will not be threatened. We will not be conquered. And we will not allow our people to be displaced or harmed by species who mistake our preference for peace with inability to wage war. I hope your government understands this. I hope they choose to respect our borders and our sovereignty. Because if they don't, she paused and her expression hardened. The Indomitable used 15% of her combat capability today. I would very much like to never find out what happens at 100%. I suspect you would too. The message ended. Mordrath sat in silence for a long moment, his claws drumming slowly on the council table. Finally, he spoke. Fleet Analyst Keelther, your professional assessment. If the Kaurian Imperium were to declare war on the Terran Coalition, what would be the outcome? Keelther didn't hesitate. Total defeat within 6 to 8 weeks. High Chancellor, optimistic estimate, possibly as little as 3 weeks if they deploy their full fleet simultaneously. And if we allied with the Korvath Unity and the Pelthian Confederation, combined defeat within 10 to 12 weeks. The humans have had 12 years to study all of our military capabilities, including alliance protocols and joint operation doctrines. They would know exactly how to counter any combined strategy we could devise. And if every major power in the galaxy formed a unified coalition against humanity, Calther pulled up a simulation that made even the hardened War Council members recoil. Such a coalition would field approximately 4,000 capital ships. High Chancellor, based on observed performance, and 74 Titan-class carriers could engage that force with a projected victory probability of 78%. However, she paused. That assumes the Titan class is humanity's most powerful vessel type. Admiral Chen referenced Leviathan-class command ships that are larger and more capable. We have no data on those vessels because they've never needed to deploy them. Vareth said, High Chancellor, we're not dealing with a species that can be defeated through military force. The Terran coalition has made conventional warfare against them a non-viable option. The only rational response is diplomatic accommodation. Shellcast scales flushed with humiliation. You're suggesting we negotiate, apologize, after they destroyed the Third Armada, after we attacked them in their own territory, or after they gave us multiple chances to withdraw peacefully? Yes, War Coordinator, I'm suggesting exactly that. Vareth's voice hardened. What's your alternative? Send more fleets to be destroyed. Escalate until the humans decide we're too dangerous to leave intact. They have the capability to sterilize our home world from orbit. The only reason they haven't is because they're showing us mercy. I suggest we accept it. Mordrath raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. Contact the Terran Coalition formal diplomatic channels. Express our regrets for the incident in the threshold system. Acknowledge their territorial sovereignty. Request negotiations for a formal peace agreement. High Chancellor Shellcath protested. The Imperium has never faced an existential threat. It couldn't defeat through military force. Mordrath cut him off. That reality has changed as of 8 hours ago. We adapt or we die. I choose adaptation. He stood his full authority radiating through the chamber. Spread the word through all military channels. The threshold system incident is to be classified as a tragic miscalculation. Human military capabilities are to be reassessed at the highest threat level, and make this absolutely clear to every fleet commander, every ship captain, every border patrol. Humanity is not to be threatened, provoked, or engaged under any circumstances without direct authorization from this council. Is that understood? A chorus of acknowledgments rippled through the chamber. Avar felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but perhaps the first step toward accepting the new reality they inhabited. The humans had redrawn the galactic order in 3 minutes of controlled violence. The question now was whether the rest of the galaxy would be smart enough to recognize it. One more thing, Mordrath said, his eyes distant. Begin a comprehensive analysis of human territory. I want to know where their shipyards are, where their major fleet bases are located, where they've been building this navy for 12 years. High Chancellor. Kia's voice carried a note of confusion because, fleet analyst, I want to understand how 74 vessels the size of mobile space stations were constructed without anyone noticing. That level of operational security, that level of resource management, that level of strategic deception. He shook his head slowly. If they can hide that, what else have they been hiding? What other capabilities exist that they haven't shown us? The question hung in the air like a ghost. Vareth thought of the indomitable operating at 15% capacity of Admiral Chen's controlled reluctance to use her full power, of the casual mention of Leviathan-class ships that were even larger. 12 years. Humanity had been in the galactic community for 12 years. And in that time, they had quietly, patiently, methodically built an empire of force that could reshape civilization itself. Dismissed, Mortar said. And someone get me the Terran Coalition ambassador on a secure channel. It's time we had a very different kind of conversation with humanity. As the council dispersed, Overoth remained standing before the holographic display of the threshold system. The debris field, the rescue operations, the Indomitable still maintaining its patient vigil, ensuring the Caladrian withdrawal was complete. One ship. Humanity had changed everything with one ship. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, Vareth knew 73 more, just like it waited in silence watching ready. The Caladrian Imperium had learned its lesson. He could only hope the rest of the galaxy was paying attention. 3 weeks later, the message reached every corner of civilized space. It wasn't transmitted through official diplomatic channels. It didn't arrive as a formal declaration or a military bulletin. Instead, it spread the way truly important information always spread, through whispers, through sensor logs shared between captains in dark bars, through intelligence operatives who couldn't quite believe what they were reporting, through the universal network of those who needed to know when the galaxy's power structure had fundamentally shifted. The footage of the threshold system engagement became the most analyzed piece of tactical data in recorded history. In the Corvath Unity Strategic Assessment Center, military analysts watched the Indomitable's weapons performance in slow motion frame by frame, trying to understand the physics that had made it possible. They failed. The math didn't work. The energy requirements exceeded anything their reactors could produce. The targeting precision surpassed their most advanced AI systems. It's not just superior technology. Senior analyst Vect Thora told the Unity Council, but it's a completely different paradigm. They're not using advanced versions of our weapons. They're using principles we haven't discovered yet. The gap isn't a matter of decades, it might be centuries. In the Pelthian Confederation, the Swarm Queens who had once terrorized 3 sectors with their bioengineered warforms watched the footage in their hive ships and felt something they hadn't experienced in their species-long history. The cold certainty of being outmatched, their swarm tactics, their numerical superiority, their regenerative capabilities, all meaningless against weapons that could erase ships from existence faster than any swarm could replace them. Send emissaries to humanity, the first queen commanded. Offer trade, offer alliance. Asterisk will offer whatever it takes to ensure we never face what the Cauldrians faced. In the neutral stations and free ports that dotted the space lanes, where merchants and mercenaries gathered to share news and gossip, the story took on mythic proportions. Some claimed the Indomitable had destroyed 500 ships, not 200. Others swore they'd seen footage of human vessels that could phase through solid matter or weapons that could ignite stars. The truth was terrifying enough that the exaggerations almost seemed unnecessary. But it was in the Cauldrian Imperium itself that the true impact crystallized. Supreme Commander Varos stood in his private quarters aboard the Sovereign's Fist, which was still undergoing repairs in the orbital shipyards above Caldra's Prime. His flagship bore scars now not from battle damage. Oh, but from the panicked retreat from systems pushed beyond their limits in the desperate flight from the Threshold system. On his desk sat a small data chip unmarked and unremarkable. It had been delivered by courier 6 hours ago, passed hand to hand through channels so secure that even he didn't know their full extent. The message attached had been simple. From Admiral Chen for your eyes only. He'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, uncertain whether he wanted to know what it contained. Finally, he inserted it into his terminal. Admiral Chen's face appeared, but not on a warship bridge this time. She was seated in what looked like an office, simple functional, with a window behind her, showing a view of Earth humanity's homeworld, the planet they'd nearly lost several times in their own violent history. If the classified historical records were accurate, Supreme Commander Varoth, she began, her voice carrying that same quiet authority he remembered. I'm recording this message 3 days after the Threshold system engagement. By the time you receive it, I expect the political situation will have stabilized somewhat and you'll have had time to process what happened. I want you to understand something that I couldn't say during our confrontation. Something that I think you've earned the right to know. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. The Indomitable is 43 years old. She was the first Titan-class carrier we ever built, constructed in a hidden shipyard in the outer reaches of our solar system before we ever made contact with the galactic community. And we built her and 73 of her sisters during a 20-year program that consumed 15% of humanity's total economic output. We bankrupted ourselves building them. We diverted resources from hospitals, from schools, from infrastructure. We made our people poorer and our lives harder for 2 decades. All to build a fleet that we hoped we would never ever need to use. Do you know why we did that, Supreme Commander? Not because we're warlike, not because we wanted to conquer, but because we studied galactic history before we revealed ourselves. We read about the Pelthian swarm's expansion. We learned about the Calrian Imperium's conquests. We saw pattern after pattern of species being subjugated, absorbed, or destroyed because they couldn't defend themselves. And we made a decision as a species that would never be us, and we would never be weak enough to be prey. Admiral Chen's expression hardened slightly. The Threshold system engagement lasted 27 seconds. In that time, we used approximately 0.1% of humanity's total naval capability. The Indomitable alone could have sustained that level of combat for 16 days straight before requiring resupply. And she's our oldest carrier. The newest ones are 22% more efficient. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, though I suspect it does. I'm telling you this because humanity needs the galaxy to understand something fundamental. We are not a threat to anyone who doesn't threaten us. We don't want your territory. We don't want to impose our government or our culture. We genuinely want to coexist peacefully with every species capable of reciprocating that desire. But we will not be tested. We will not be pushed. And we will not allow anyone to mistake our patience for weakness ever again. She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. You made a mistake, Supreme Commander. An understandable one, given the information you had. But you were lucky. You encountered me, and I'm bound by rules of engagement that prioritize minimum necessary force. Other commanders in our fleet might have been less restrained. Some of them remember when humanity was weak, when we couldn't defend ourselves, when we had to accept injustice because we lacked the power to resist. Those officers don't share my patience. So I want you to carry a message back to your high command, and I want you to share it with every government, at every military, every species that considers probing humanity's borders or testing our resolve. The age of the weak prey and the strong predator is over. Humanity has ensured that we've built a new paradigm where the cost of aggression is so high that only the suicidal would attempt it. We prefer cooperation, but we've guaranteed that we'll never need to beg for it. Admiral Chen stood moving to the window behind her desk. Earth rotated slowly in the frame, blue and white, and achingly beautiful. There's an old saying from our history, peace through superior firepower. We've taken that principle and elevated it to the level of absolute deterrence. The threshold system was your warning. It was the galaxy's warning. There won't be another one. Next time, if there is a next time, we won't show the restraint I showed you. I hope there isn't a next time, Supreme Commander. I genuinely do, because I've seen what happens when humanity stops holding back, and it's not something I ever want to witness again. She turned back to face the camera. The diplomatic negotiations between our governments will begin next week. I expect they'll go smoothly. Your High Chancellor seems like a pragmatic individual. He understands that the cost of conflict with humanity is infinite and the benefits are zero. That's good. That's the kind of rational calculation that keeps civilizations alive. But just in case anyone in your government or in any other government is considering whether the threshold system engagement was a fluke, whether maybe humanity just got lucky, whether perhaps we're not as powerful as we appeared. She smiled, and it was not a warm expression. I've attached to this message the locations of 17 of our major fleet bases. I've included full sensor profiles so your long-range observation posts can verify them. I want you to see what we've built. I want you to understand the scale of the force that has been watching your borders, watching everyone's borders, waiting patiently for peace to prevail. The message ended. Vareth sat in silence for a long moment, then accessed the attached files. Star charts appeared marking 17 systems in human territory. Systems that had registered as low-priority colonies or minor outposts in Cauldrian intelligence assessments. He activated long-range sensor archives, pulling data from observation posts that had been watching human space for years. The facilities were there. They had always been there, massive orbital installations that had been classified as mining stations or civilian infrastructure. When viewed with the proper analysis protocols, with an understanding of what to look for, they resolved into something entirely different. Shipyards, dozens of them, each one large enough to construct vessels on the scale of the Indomitable. Some of them showed energy signatures consistent with active construction. New ships being built, the fleet growing even now. And in deep space between the facilities, new contacts resolved. Not civilian vessels or merchant ships, but warships operating on patrol routes, maintaining watch over human territory, with the patient vigilance of predators that knew they had no natural enemies. Var had thought 74 Titan-ass carriers was the full extent of humanity's naval power. While looking at the sensor data at the industrial capacity humanity had been quietly building for decades, he realized that might just be the beginning. His communicator chimed. High Chancellor Mordrath's personal code. Supreme Commander Morath's voice was grave. I've received the same message from Admiral Chen. I've viewed the sensor data. Tell me I'm interpreting it wrong. Tell me they don't have the industrial capacity to build hundreds more of those vessels. Varoth looked at Earth, rotating peacefully on his screen, at the blue planet that had spawned this species of terrifying capability and careful restraint. I can't tell you that, High Chancellor, because I think they do. A long silence. Then the treaty negotiations will proceed exactly as they dictate. Mordrath said finally, and we will spend the next century rebuilding our relationship with humanity based on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. Because Supreme Commander, I have finally accepted what you learned in the threshold system. We are not the apex predators of this galaxy anymore. Perhaps we never were. We were simply fortunate enough never to encounter the species that was. The communication ended. Vareth turned off his terminal and walked to his viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Indomitable was returning to its base. Admiral Chen and her crew are already preparing for whatever came next. Somewhere out there, 73 other Titan-ass carriers waited in silence, along with however many other vessels humanity had built in their decades of preparation. The galaxy had changed, but not through conquest or war or the usual cycles of rise and fall that mark galactic history. It had changed because one species had looked at the darkness between the stars and decided that they would never be vulnerable again. They would never be weak. They would never be prey. And they had succeeded so completely that the very concept of threatening them had become absurd. Var thought about Admiral Chen's final words. There won't be another warning. He believed her. The Kaurian Imperium would spread the word. The Korvath Unity would adjust their strategic assessments. The Pelthian Confederation would recalculate their expansion plans. Every government, every military, every species would come to the same inevitable conclusion. Humanity was no longer an unknown factor in galactic politics. They were the dominant factor. We, the force that could reshape everything if provoked. But more importantly, they were the force that chose not to, that preferred peace. That had built overwhelming power specifically so they would never need to use all of it. Vareth understood now why humanity had been so quiet for 12 years. They'd been waiting, watching, hoping that the galaxy would be rational enough, civilized enough, wise enough to coexist peacefully. The Kaurian Imperium hadn't been wise enough. They'd tested humanity's patience and they'd discovered the terrible truth that patience backed by overwhelming force was the most dangerous combination in the universe. He pulled up one final file, the casualty reports from the Threshold system. 6,743 dead, thousands more injured, ships destroyed, careers ended, and the Third Armada broken, and humanity had shown mercy, had stopped when they could have continued, had rescued survivors when they could have left them to die. That more than the weapons or the technology or the impossible ships was what truly frightened Varoth. Not humanity's capability for violence, but their capacity for restraint, even in the midst of demonstrating that violence. The cold calculation that said, we will hurt you only as much as necessary to teach you this lesson, and not one iota more. Because it meant they'd thought about it, planned it, built doctrine and rules of engagement around the precise application of overwhelming force. They weren't conquerors drunk on power. They were professionals executing a strategy that had been refined over decades and that made them unstoppable. The stars glittered in the viewport, one of the same stars that had watched empires rise and fall for millennia. But Vareth knew that those ancient witnesses had just seen something new, the emergence of a species that had solved the fundamental problem of galactic politics. How do you achieve peace in a universe of competing powers and conflicting interests? Humanity's answer. You become so powerful that attacking you is suicide, and then you choose peace anyway. It was elegant. It was terrifying. And it was, Varoth had to admit, brilliant. The age of Kaurian dominance was over. The age of the old galactic order was over. The age of humanity had begun. And the galaxy, whether it liked it or not, would learn to live in that new reality. What do you think about this clash between alien arrogance and human power? I'll share your thoughts below. And remember to like and subscribe for more HFY stories.